Welcome back everyone to the Integral European Conference. Today in this session, we have Tim Schneider talking about an integral perspective on nutrition. Tim is a health psychologist and a coach. And after realizing enormous benefit from an integral approach to his own well-being, he started bringing others on the same journey. So today we will learn about his approach. Before I hand the mic over to Tim, however, I do have a little bit of housekeeping to do. First, please be aware that this session is being recorded, so whatever you share will be available in the video replay. The breakout rooms, however, are not recorded, so please feel free to share however you like there. The second, if you have any questions, please do write them in the chat. Tim won't be monitoring it, but I will be, and I will present it back to him at an appropriate moment. And of course, you will have an opportunity to ask him questions yourselves as well. So without any further ado, let me hand the mic over to Tim. Tim Schneider.
Yes, thank you, Chinmay, for that warm welcome. I hope everyone can hear me well. I'm very grateful for all of you showing up today. I know your time is precious and it's pretty early since the entire schedule is kind of late in the evening to get all the Americans in here as well. For me, nutrition is a very personal topic, and it has expanded into something that actually brought me into the idea of integral theory. And that is, as I cured most of my health issues and allergies with an approach to nutrition, and this is kind of where I learned the basics about it. But at the same time, I got rid of my mental issues and my depression and my insomnia with meditation. And I had some very deep experiences with both of them. So I think at a certain point, it's kind of indistinguishable where they're coming from. But integral theory was the first time where I got a map that actually showed me which route I was going. And that was really nice to actually have a vocabulary to be able to describe where I'm coming from. Now, I have to say I'm kind of new to integral. I mean, I really dug deep the last year or so from the last Congress on. And I'm aware that some of the people here have studied integral nutrition for as long as I can walk. So please excuse if I'm mispronouncing some vocabulary or getting some colors wrong or whatever. But this is something I've spent a lot of time into the last year, especially as I was trying to apply especially for quadrant map to nutrition. Because I mean, we all have to eat, right? I mean, I think probably everyone here is eating and likes to eat and has likely gained some kind of benefit from nutrition. But it's also something that is pretty indistinguishable from our environment. And it's hard to say that nutrition only affects me. It's of course something that affects all of us, right? It's something that's a fully global event. And that's what I would like to get into. Now, after mapping this out a couple of times, I gave this to a friend who made it look a little nicer, and I would like to share that. And it came to look a little like this, right? And this is what I would like to use as a guiding reference to go through today. So in the upper right, of course, everything that affects me, everything that affects my biology. And I hope you excuse myself. I'm a real nerd for biology. So I hope I don't get too far ahead of myself. So maybe raise a hand or something if that's too much biology. I just really like that stuff. Wait, let me make sure I can see some of you as well. And the upper right approach was very useful for me to actually understand where a lot of people are coming from, because there's so much confusion in nutritional science, in personal biases. There's this diet, there's that diet, there's, fast or don't eat, just go out and get sunlight, eat protein, eat fats, no fats are evil, right? There's pretty much everything in nutrition. And this kind of helped me to get an idea on how to structure this and also understand where certain people are coming from. And this is where I would like to start now, to actually build a foundation. So we can go a little bit deeper later on and actually get back to that. So when I mapped out the different levels I found in the upper right quadrant, everything that affects me, I found there's very gross distinctions between nutrition that everyone that starts out with nutrition is probably heard of or getting into. And that is the idea of macronutrients, right? It's like the proteins, the fats, the carbohydrates. I guess you could technically put alcohols in there as well. And of course, calories. And I had a lot of clients who were, I don't want to say it, but stuck, but kind of stuck at this level. And they were trying to solve everything through only that lens, right? Trying to get their macros right, trying to get their calories right in order to, well, mostly lose weight. But it's a very, very narrow approach. I mean, what is a calorie to our body? It's not really a measurement that our body has anything to do with. It's a physical measurement of how much energy is required to heat up 1 liter of water about 1 degree. So it's very physical. It's not how our body works. And if I look at the macronutrients like proteins, for example, and I struggled with this a lot, I gotta be honest, like early on, there's so much information on how much protein you should eat. I don't know, it's like animal or plant protein or whatever. And I never really knew what a protein was. So I got myself a physics textbook to actually learn about what proteins are. And as it turns out, and I think all of you are probably aware of, proteins are relevant for pretty much everything, for every kind of messaging system in our body. Proteins are required. If we think of neurotransmitters, that are proteins. If we think of hormones, also proteins. If you go a little bit smaller and think of enzymes, if we think of receptors, if we think of antibodies, these are all proteins. And suddenly it gets a lot deeper, and it's not just useful to say, well, eat 2 grams of protein per kilogram or something. But what's the use of that? What's the protein? What is the profile of amino acids? And at that time, it also gets a little bit deeper into the world of micronutrients, right? All the vitamins, the minerals, and suddenly you expand from just 3 things to about 40 different things. And all of these interact with each other. If you've ever seen a mineral wheel, I don't know, maybe, does anyone know what a mineral wheel is? All right. I should have included a picture with that. It's basically the study of how each mineral affects each other, right? So some inhibit each other, some impair the reabsorption of each other. And it's just an incredibly confusing web, basically, because it's already getting so complicated in a system where everything affects everything else with 40 variables. And this is where I actually see a lot of people today looking at the micronutrient world and trying to see where they can get all the vitamins and minerals from. But if we take that a step further into the increasing diversity of that topic, we get to the word of secondary messenger, also kind of proteins, I guess, phytonutrients. These are which could be called, well, they could be called a lot, but these are the polyphenols. These are the things that give color to plants, for example. These can be things like fasting mimicking compounds like resveratrol, which are also getting studied extensively to be used in the realm of medicine, to be manufactured for certain drugs. And this is another huge leap of complexity because there's so many of these. It's very overwhelming, and they have very complicated names, so it's not very easy to remember. But if we take that a step further, it's suddenly not only about the food that we eat, it's about the interaction of the food that we have with the environment of that food. And that is where I put it in the green area, right? That is the relationship of the food. It's the biome. It's all the bacteria and the microorganisms behind that. And just to give you an idea of the complexity of that topic, humans have, I mean, about 1 species, at least that we know of in this world, which have about 20,000 different genes. The world of bacteria, which is also very, very prevalent in this, and I think most have heard about the gut bacteria, have about 40,000 species with about 2 million different genes. Parasites go even further with about 2 billion different genes. And the world of fungi has, 125 trillion different genes. This is just, an extraordinary explosion again of diversity, right? It's an exponential, it's like a logarithmic growth. And to actually become aware to say, well, look, our human genome, and I mean, genes are what prescribe proteins, so right, things can be messaged to the body, is so small when compared to these microorganisms that are residing in our gut, in our skin, pretty much everywhere around us. And neuroscience is also showing how these microorganisms are residing in pretty much every single organ. So they're also in the brain, even though the brain was thought to be a very sterile ground. But no, there are microorgans in the brain that are constantly exchanging informations. Now, viruses actually take this one step further, and that is the study of viromics. And viruses are a lot smaller than bacteria and fungi. They're not really alive, right? They're just a little bit of information. And they're mostly used as a messenger system between all these microorganisms that are constantly changing information. So stressed organisms, for example, begin to produce more viruses to inform their environment about that stressor that is coming. So organisms in the environment can perceive that virus and adapt to it, kind of like a status update, right? A software update. It's like, here's my information, why I'm breaking down. It's all right, thank you so much. I can now upgrade if that organism has the ability to adapt. And there are 10 to the 31 viruses in the atmosphere and in the ocean, and about 10 to the 30 viruses in the soil. And this is something I couldn't even put in a number in here because it wouldn't fit, because it's so much. And we have about 10 to the 15 viruses in our bloodstream at every time. And I mean, of course, viruses are also in the media right now because there's this one very bad virus. Yeah, I think we will get to this a little bit later on, but it just staggers me how this is blown so much out of proportion from how important viruses are. And if we go one step further back, about half of the genome we have as humans was inserted by viruses. So we would only be half human if it wasn't for viruses. Viruses are existential to life. There would be no life without the communication that viruses can give us. And I will also try to turn back to this a little bit later on, because that is exactly where we're destroying most of the environment, most of the soil, and that is leading to huge issues down the line. Now, the next step here would be the idea of biophotonics, which is incredibly fascinating, and it's honestly not something I can comfortably speak about because it's very, very new. But it's basically the idea how sunlight gets converted into energy by the cooperation of these microorganisms. Maybe if there are some questions, I can get a little bit into this later on, but it's very complex, or at least I don't have the ability yet to describe it simply. Let's say it like that. But let's just say there is a difference between plants growing in sunlight and actually converting that into carbohydrates, right? Storing them, or getting it from artificial light. There's a difference behind that. And in the next perspective, of course, you can look at it energetically, you can look at it from a quantum perspective, which is just another leap in complexity. And that is the overall theme that I was trying to get at here, right? It's from 3 macronutrients to about 40 minerals to about 100,000 secondary messengers to about something we have like trillions of microorganisms. And from an energetic perspective, there's no different, right? Every single particle is connected to every single particle at the same time, and each and every particle is influencing themselves. So the complexity is just infinite, right? And that is kind of the idea I had behind graphing this. Now, what I think is very important, and I usually try to describe something like this to people who are asking me, like, what should they eat? Like, should I eat this or that? Or I don't know, is broccoli good for me? Can I eat meat? And I usually refer them to an idea like this to understand the concept of quality of food. Right? Nutrition is more about the quality than just the nutrients in them. I mean, I can have, let's say, a hamburger that is completely void of these things in the higher hemispheres, right? It has only calories. Well, it has some protein, all right. Maybe it has some vitamins and minerals, but everything above that is lacking. And our body has to produce that from somewhere, right? So we have to put energy in that ourselves. So that's probably not very nourishing. But on the other way around, I mean, there's stories about, I'm not too sure what it's called in English, like people who are just eating from sunlight, like living from sunlight, they don't have to eat. I'm sure most of you have heard about this. And I think that's also very partial. It's not a complete and integral perspective on this. And there may be some individuals who can do this, but it's probably not the vast majority of us, right? I mean, most of us also have a pretty normal life and don't like meditate for 24 hours a day for about 30 years in a cave or something. That's something very, very specific. And I'm not saying it can work, but it's just not for everyone. All right, I think I would give it back to you maybe for a few questions, or maybe one question. Do you find any of this useful? Is there something you are missing, or is this a concept that you can grasp, or is it like too out of there? Let's see. So if there are any questions, or I should go on. Can you just give me a thumbs up, like an evaluation of your thumbs? Is this useful? Is this concept useful to you, or is it okay? Okay, awesome. Because I will get back to this later on, and then you will understand why I chose to start at this point. But the most important thing to me really is the complexity, right? It's the diversity that is increasing exponentially or logarithmic, and as soon as we try to control a single variable and not look at the entire system, we cannot expect to know what the outcome is going to be. And I think you're going to know what I'll be talking about later on. All right, so the lower right quadrant here, right? The collective, the exterior, all the systems that we're getting our food from, is something I've put a lot of time and energy from, and I've not been able to talk about it a lot because most people just kind of shut off. Because I have to admit, like most of my environment isn't very integrally thinking. And this also was kind of useful. I used this in a shadow exercise with Cindy Liu as well, because I can be very triggered by people at the supermarket that are just buying tons and tons of crap food. And I see all that damage that is getting behind that, not just for the individual, but for the environment and for the globe and all the pesticides that are being used. And that really triggers me. So that was definitely a good shadow work as well. But I chose the egocentric, ethnocentric inclusion here, because of course, the more inflamed we are, right, the less nutrient information we've gathered over a lifetime, the lower our state of consciousness, the more we are prone to look for survival, right? The more, I think most of you are also aware of this, and the less resources can be spared for, oh, look, that is a really high quality, biologically, dynamically grown food or whatever. Like, no, that doesn't matter. It's whatever is available, right? If there's a McDonald's in front of the door, that's what I'm going to eat. And that really shifted my thinking, because if you look at the prevalence from, let's say, fast food or generally processed unhealthy foods, they would be ranking very low in the upper right quadrant, right? Maybe macros, maybe some micros, but not really anything of this. The availability of that is so much higher than anything of the opposite. Like, I mean, even I really have to look consciously at stuff that actually includes the entire spectrum, because it's very hard to get a very high quality nutrition today. So if we expand that though, we go to a more ethnocentric world. And I think that is where people are also beginning to learn a lot more about the system, right? They're looking for rules that can be applied. Maybe they're going for more locality and trying to find a farmer's market that is somewhere close nearby to get a more, how do you say, to get more connection to the food. But I think the biggest jump by far here is the world-centric perspective. Because I think we have to be honest with ourselves that most of the food that is consumed in the world today, even if that may not apply directly to you, is being produced by companies that are basically interacting worldwide. The US basically started this and is now exporting it all around the world. And this is also where I wanted to make a deeper dive. Oh, wait, I'm also getting some. Yes, Bruno, I'm also seeing the poisons and pesticides, and I will get into exactly that topic now. I think that's a huge issue right now. And that's also what I wanted to spend some time now. And so let's jump into that a little bit. Because most of the food we get today is controlled by 4 companies. These are namely Bayer, ChemChina, Corteva, and BASF. And I think these numbers are from 2016, where they had a $15 trillion monopoly, which was around 70% of the world's entire economy. At that point, they controlled 90% of the grain trade in the world, 70% of all agrochemicals and fertilizers, 60% of all of the seeds, and basically similar numbers to soil data, to the equipment, as well as to the insurances for these equipments and the farmers. And they're also yield insurances. With the equipment is also something that is that I've just very recently discovered, but it's kind of like, right, the new iPhone or whatever. Like there's some new tractor coming out every new year, and these are highly mechanized, right? They have software updates, and the farmers, they cannot repair these tractors. They need to actually hack the system before they can do anything. And these tractors are sending out huge amounts of data to these companies, like how often are they being used, how often are they being is there pesticides being used, how many acres per hour can be driven. Huge amounts of data are being collected. And I mean, there was also a workshop about AI, and I think it's important to mention here, at least as my perspective, that data is not knowledge and processing of data is not intelligence. But that is how we treat a lot of this, right? We try to gather the data, and I'm saying we very consciously here, because this is a big part of the collective and we can't really get out of it. Now, let me drive at one of the issues right beforehand, and that's a quote from Vandana Shiva. She said, "In living systems, causality is systemic, and properties and behaviors depend on context, on relationship, on complexity. It is 4-dimensional causality, the integrated non-separability of living processes in space and time." I think this is something, right? I mean, probably why a lot of us are here. It's the integral approach, right? It's like the idea that things are connected on all kind of different perspectives. On the other hand, linear causality allows claims to be made linking specific tools to complex multi-causal phenomena. And this is something that I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into, because the linear causality is something we see a lot in the narrative that is being used to keep these companies going. And I think later on, I don't want to like shift the blame on just these companies, because I've also met some people who work as companies like this, and they're amazing people, and they're just doing their best to, well, feed their family and do some stuff. But I think we will also get into this later on. So I have one example prepared, and that is the idea of Monsanto. I think most of you have also heard about this. Now, Bayer is a German, I think originally a pharmaceutical company, who have bought up by Monsanto for about 66 billion, while they had 30,000 active court cases pending because of one active ingredient in their flagship product Roundup, and that is glyphosate. Because of health and illness related courtship cases. So they decided to buy up these court cases as well for another 6 billion, which I mean is just peanuts if you think about it, just buying this company for 66 billion, and then, well, we have another 6 billion, so just settle all these court cases. Monsanto is the company that brought us dioxin, Agent Orange, PCPs, and glyphosate. So, I mean, that's a register that I wouldn't be particularly proud of. But I want to get into glyphosate a little bit more. And let's see how I do this with all of you. Now, glyphosate blocks the so-called EPSP synthase, which is an enzyme within the shikimate pathway. And that enzyme is required for the production of multiple essential amino acids. Namely, it's tyrosine, it's, I forgot, what's the precursor for serotonin? Brain fog. And it's phenylalanine. But it's about 35% of the plant's mass is made up from these 3 essential amino acids. And 2 of them, if we look at the human body, are precursors for the neurotransmitters serotonin or melatonin, and everything, right? The tryptophans behind it, tryptophan is the name, right? And the catecholamines like dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline. And these are basically getting blocked to be produced, so these plants cannot live that are being sprayed with that. It used to be registered as an antibiotic. It's now more like used as a herbicide because it can be used for pretty much everything. That's kind of the idea behind it. And through genetic modification, we can actually change the shikimate pathway of these plants to have a higher EPSP production, so they can outlast all the plants that are being sprayed. So if we have a field of Roundup Ready, which is just the active name of the product that is being used, the herbicide, I have to mention that glyphosate is just one active ingredient of that. It's the best known. That's my thought. Oh, yeah. So these can be genetically modified, so they can outlast everything that has been sprayed. So if I monocrop, let's say wheat, and I have that modified so it has a higher production of this enzyme, I can spray the entire field, everything dies, all the weeds, as we will see later on, also all the microorganisms in the soil, but the plant can survive and grow. And this has usually been done through a process of horizontal gene transfer. So there was always a virus that had some kind of genetic information, in this case, the higher EPSP production, that was then inserted into a bacteria that was very good at what we call horizontal gene transfer, which means they can basically dock on to another bacteria that is carrying genetic information and pass on that exact information. So in this way, at least in the transition from the 1900s to the 2000s, this is the way that genetic information was getting into plants and the newest like genetic modifications plants. Today we're doing this a little bit different. We're doing this with Cas9, with CRISPR-Cas9, where we can also do this with synthetic DNA and just insert these into bacteria that then transfer that around to the plants. Now, what's kind of scary about this horizontal gene transfer is not only applying to one specific plant or one bacteria, it's everywhere in nature. And it means that genes can be transferred horizontally across species. And that, of course, leads to a very high resistance in, for example, weeds that are resistant to these Roundup or to glyphosate. It allows for all the other ones to die out, though. So I think in the Midwest in US, we have about 20 different glyphosate-resistant weeds now, instead of the 20,000 that used to be there about 100 years ago. And these are all resistant. So more and more glyphosate has to be sprayed to keep these weeds in check, because I don't want them to compete with my monofarm corn, right? Now, of course, this puts a huge pressure on the farmer, who has to use more and more and more of this. And even though I think the usage in this area only increased by 24%, because of a variety of different factors, the cost per acre for these herbicide sprayed field tripled. And I think that's, I mean, it also depends on other variables like dependencies, right? Because they have certain people who buy up their food and actually pay them a certain price, which they, so they're kind of forced into a certain price regimen. And it's not really included how much more glyphosate or whatever else they're spraying on the field they have to be used. This is also heavily influenced by subsidies that are not really looking at soil health and how, let's say, rotational yielding could be beneficial, but only what is getting subsidized. So if wheat is getting subsidized, I will grow wheat. If that's needed, I don't really care. It's getting subsidized, so I have a higher chance of making profit of it. There's also huge issues with loans and the Farm Bill rule, which maybe we can get into later as well. But all of these variables lead to a ton of farmers going broke and getting in debt, which can then be bought up very, very cheaply by people who have a lot of money. And I think since last year, something Bill Gates is the largest landowner in the US, just because he was able to buy up all this cheap land. I have no idea what he's going to do with it, but I don't like the idea of just one single person having like so much land. But of course, there are also other factors as well. And I think out of like time reasons, I can't really go into all of these, but the studies are pretty scary on this, as it has been shown that glyphosate harms the microbiome and it causes epigenetic changes that can lead to all kinds of diseases. We see this with birth defects, low sperm counts, and everything that has led to reproduction of organs. There is, this is an extremely fascinating map I found. This is just the use of glyphosate on corn in 2015. I had the same map also on wheat and soy and on other crops. And what's interesting, now the United States might not look as bad here, but if you do this with soy and other crops, the United States looks a lot worse. And I've actually found a doctor, he's called Zach Bush, who I've probably studied more than any other human being the last 6 months, who has predicted the current pandemic that we have in 2017, just with this data, because he overlaid the data of glyphosate usage in the world with the amount of particle matter, so carbon emission basically in the air. It's called PM 2.5, right? It's the very small particles in the air, because they can bind to these chemicals and actually carry them into the body. So the higher the concentration of carbon in particulate matter, the higher the concentration of these pesticides in our body, which of course causes more internal damage. And now that it is more getting summer, right, the plants are all blooming up, so they can suck a lot of carbon out of the air. So the carbon emission goes down. And that's usually when we also see all kinds of respiratory infections go down. And what he did was basically link these two over each other. This is only the pesticide use. And you see popping up China, especially the province of Hubei. You see especially northern Italy, and you see everything around the Mississippi in the Midwest in the US. And these are the 3 places where he predicted the most death of any respiratory infection in the following years. And, you know, maybe it's a coincidence, but that's basically exactly what happened. So I just thought that was very interesting. Of course, a big part is the innate of our immune system is the innate immune system. And that is also something which, like me personally, getting into health and nutrition from an immune system perspective, I'm kind of shocked why we don't hear anything about this, because everything we're hearing today is about the adaptive immune system, right? It's about getting antibodies to something. But the adaptive immune system is only one single part of our immune system. The innate immune system makes about 80% of that. And it's basically the collaboration of microorganisms that are residing in our body that also want to like live on and actually make us immune. The human body has evolved with these microorganisms and actually, began to cooperate and actually export a lot of the immune system outside to these microorganisms. And at least I believe that a big part what we're seeing the current pandemic is because we've destroyed that innate immune system, right? I think that's why when we're looking about the high glyphosate uses in, let's say, northern Italy or in the province of Hawaii, these people have a very destroyed immune system because of all of these pesticides and herbicides, right? I mean, of course, it's hard to say this is like correlative, it's causative, but I think it's a very interesting take on this, because maybe if I look at viruses again, I mentioned earlier, viruses need a certain environment to replicate themselves. So if we see the reproduction rate of a virus going up like crazy, like we're seeing it, what is the opposite of that? Like, what is the opposite trend of that? What has changed in the environment so a virus can actually replicate like that? Because viruses are always there, they're always in balance. So what has changed in the environment? I think this is a big change of that environment. It's basically making the entire globe more unhealthy. And now we're seeing that symptom of it going up. Just a few things, of course, also to mention with the use of glyphosate, housing prices go down because the lands are getting destroyed and they're losing value. Of course, this entire thing gets in the water cycle. If we look at official reports from Monsanto, it says it does not. But if we look at study that independently looked at this, it's pretty clear that it does. It's actually one of the selling points from Monsanto that say there's less irrigation because it just stays in the soil, so you don't even have to spray it over and over again. What we're seeing is though that we have to spray over and over again, and that it leaks into the water because it's too much. And of course, right, then there's this entire cycle that probably everyone has learned in school. It gets into the rain and it rains down. And I had some interesting statistics about this from a study, which was kind of crazy. But it's around, I think 77% of the rainwater in the US was found with glyphosate. Yeah. Oops, I don't put anything in there. What we also see a lot is that science is getting retracted, and I think that's also a very, let's say, dangerous story. Because these things, they are getting studied, right? And they're also getting some government funding because they want to find out, well, is this really bad for me or is it not? And some of the studies that have been published that showed very damaging effects of glyphosate have been retracted a couple of years back. And almost always it had something to do with a change in personnel in the journal that has published this paper. And in the case, I'm not sure, I don't think I've put it in here. But in the case where I've looked at it, it was previous Monsanto personnel that actually got the position in that journal to review and then retract these papers, which I think is pretty scary, because science is not it's not resolute, right? It's not a final prediction. It's something that should at least be continuously ongoing and ongoing, ongoing. And there should always be polarity. There should always be two different perspectives. And suddenly deleting one of them, I don't know, it's making me uncomfortable. Maybe one of the last topics, and then we can make this a little lighter, is of course the topic of antimicrobial resistance. We see this a lot with antibiotics, especially in livestock. And I mean, I think this is one of the scariest things to me personally, especially with the amount of poisons and antibiotics we use, with all the hand sanitizers we're trying to get rid of viruses that are not alive. I think this is a huge issue, because the same principle with the horizontal gene transfer that we're seeing in the big fields and now basically everywhere in the world, we also see in the smaller microcosm, where the extinction and use of aggressive antibiotics or antimicrobials are just leading to resistance down the line, and suddenly we cannot just take an antibiotic to get rid of these. So let's jump out a little bit. And I still have that. So before making this a little lighter, I have one pretty depressing study as well, which looked at the transgenerational effects and was published in the Study of Nature. And this was a study that looked at the acute exposure from glyphosate on mice. So acute meant only one generation was exposed to that, and it was a pretty low level. It was about half of what would be considered safe. And this generation was actually, it didn't have any symptoms. It had some behavioral changes, but it wasn't sicker. It died of a normal age. But the offspring, so this is the F1, the F2, and the F3, had a significant increase in different diseases. And these are just some of the statistics I picked out. So F1 is the first, right? It's the daughter. Then F2 is the second generation. F3 is the third generation. And we saw how multiple diseases, I mean, this is a female, but a male look pretty similar, are skyrocketing with each frequent generation. We see the rate of obesity going up after F2 and F3. And I mean, if you look at the study, it has been done with like 20 different things. I didn't want to put like 20 graphs in here, but they all have a pretty similar trend. And I mean, this is pretty scary already. They also looked at which they said DMR is DNA methylation related genes. So this is basically the epigenetic changes. So where were structural changes in these epigenetic markers? And the first two were in transcription and signaling. And I think any one of you who knows a little bit of genetics, this is really bad news, because I mean, this is probably the most important thing that a cell is doing. It's transcribing things so it can produce new proteins and actually communicate. I mean, to me, this is really bad. If this changes and gets damaged, this is very bad. I mean, if you don't know a lot about genetics, this is probably going to miss, but I thought it was important to mention. And of course, you can say this is in mice, and yes, it is in mice. But we're also seeing this in humans. And of course, it's a little bit difficult to have these controlled experiments with human. But when we plot the rate of autism, and in fact, with all autoimmune disease against the use of glyphosate in corn, we have a pretty strong correlation, right? And I mean, correlation is not causation. I think that's right. I mean, there's a lot of different things that have changed in the last 20 years. But I mean, that's pretty near perfect, I'd say. Yeah, I think the estimates in 1950, there were about 1 in 30,000 to 1 in 50,000 kids having autism. In 2050, it will be probably 1 in 2. So that's also pretty kind of depressing. So let's get out of that and look at this from a little bit bigger perspective. Why are these companies still running if we actually know all these bad stuff? And it has a lot of different variables. I just took some of them out. I probably think we can get up with a lot more. One of them are the financial influences, especially from the financial sector, because most of these companies are being traded on the stock market. People can actually buy and be a stake or shareholder of these companies. And so we're also seeing how huge investment groups, I think Vanguard Group is one of the largest in especially these 4 companies, who are basically being bought up by billionaires, by people who have tons of money and seeing this as an investment strategy. If we look at the website of Bayer, for example, and they try to defend their usage of glyphosate after they bought up Monsanto, one of the first things they mention is also, well, like, we're trying to get rid of this issue, not glyphosate, the issues. And on first line are the values of our share and shareholders, of our stake and shareholders. So they basically write on their website, our first interest is to serve the people who want to make money with us. It's not about feeding the world, about making people healthy or whatever. Well, of course, there's a huge amount of lobbyism as well. I think I put some statistics in here. Yeah, I mean, lobbyism is pretty much prevalent in every sector. I think if you look a little bit into it, but 100% of the members in the Farm Bill, which is at least in the US, the main regulator of food and agricultural politics, have received donations from Monsanto or other companies. Coke, Pepsi, Monsanto, and American Beverage Society, Nestle, General Mills, and McDonald's are the largest contributors of these. There's also things like law shielding happening. And this was also with one example from the transgenerational data, where it's actually forbidden for the EPA to consider transgenerational data, because in 2018, legislation had passed through a politician that forbid to actually legally consider transgenerational data, which has received money from Monsanto, which I don't know, it's just pretty unresponsible, but all right. Then of course there's huge amount of subsidizing, and this used to be very useful, I guess, especially after the world wars. So because the idea was, look, we give you money so you can produce cheap mass food for us to feed the world. But this is very integrated today with these two variables, and subsidizing is getting used more to basically make more money and not really to grow what is really needed or what would be useful. The same goes for the regulations. I don't think I want to get too much into that, but there's a lot of paperwork that has to be done if you approve certain chemicals. And in the EPA, there's two different ways you can do that. And it's very, very partial, right? It's a very partial approach. It's either saying, all right, whatever you're doing, like if it's genetically modifying a plant, is that new protein something we already know? Is it something we've already seen in nature somewhere before? Well, then it's safe. And the second way is to just look at a study that has an acute exposure, like a one-time exposure. But I think the issue is really the chronic exposure of all these things. And that is not being tested, and it should not be. At least not to the APA. I think it should. So this results in farms getting, like bigger farms getting subsidized and actually being able to buy up land to make bigger and bigger farms. It made monocropping a lot more financially suitable, which is now beginning to change. Because there's a certain limit being hit, because the soil is so dead that we're actually seeing, for the last 10 years, we're seeing no more increase in yield. For the last 100 years, we've also always seen an increase, and for the last 10 years, it's become stagnant. Of course, these seeds that are genetically modified are getting patented and controlled, and every 2 years, there's the new modification that is coming out. And these are, first, they're very expensive. And it's illegal for a farmer or even for any personal. I recently read the book by Michael Pollan, The Botany of Desire, and he bought some Monsanto potatoes, and he was scared of getting sued if he did not get rid of these plants in the next year, because if he had any of these genetically modified plants the next year where he didn't have the license to grow it, he would be in big trouble. And of course, it's right. It's like the new iPhone. Like every new year, there's a new modification, and we're seeing the same with a new modification of plants. We're seeing the same with animals since about 10 years as well. We've seen it in genetically modified fish. We've seen it in pigs to make them more resistant to antimicrobials. And I mean, of course, right now we're also seeing this in humans, and we're all standing in line to get the newest modification, right, to get us in line with the one virus. Of course, these are creating huge amount of dependencies for the farmers, and I've also mentioned the overuse of antibiotics, which are also a big issue later down the line, because all of this leads to basically what we saw earlier in the upper right quadrant, a lack of things missing to make a body healthy. We see obesity and malnourishment exploding in all the countries that are basically doing this. We've seen it with autoimmune issues. And I want to get to a last point now, and that is the idea of the industrial use behind it. This is from Kansas. No, I think the first one is from the US. So 95% of US farmland is used to grow commodity crops like corn and wheat and soy. if we'd actually just looked at the subsidies and put on the table, like I think you all know this table, like you should add, I don't know, this much vegetables, this much fruit, and this much, I don't know, milk. If we just look at the amount of subsidies, 65% of that should be corn, about 20% should be cotton, about 15 should be soy, only about 2% should be livestock, and only 1.2% should be vegetables, because that's how we are subsidizing the growth of these foods. So where is all that food going? And in Kansas, we see 94, which is 95% agriculture by acreage. Yet they have to import 95% of their food because they're not growing food, they're growing corn. And corn is being used industrially. I mean, a big portion is also to turn them into livestock, but since about 20 or 30 years, the biggest proponent of corn is getting used into ethanol, which is now used in biofuel. So, right, it says this E5 or E10 that we're seeing when we're fueling up the car. That is ethanol that is derived from genetically modified and sprayed corn. Of course, corn is also very relevant for companies like Pepsi and Coca-Cola because they need a high fructose corn syrup to keep all their sodas going. But this is really the last point I wanted to get at. If you've seen the Pirates of the Caribbean, it's the idea, part of the ship, part of the crew. We are a part of this. Like, we cannot get out of this system and say, well, I don't eat corn or wheat, so it's not my problem. Well, it is, because it's so deeply ingrained in our culture that if I take so if I have to take the car, for example, I'm still fueling the system. If I eat anything with sugar, I still fueling the system. Cornstarch is also used in, let's say, in, for example, soaps as a binding agent. I'm still fueling the system. I'm still doing it with subsidies, with my tax money. And so I think we all have to be aware that we are a part of this, and there's really no way around it. So, I mean, I'm certainly a part of it, and it's difficult not to. All right. I think there's one, I know this can be very depressing because it's a lot of negative stuff, but I want to get out a little bit, because if we zoom out, we actually see, wow, this is just one small point of view. And I actually color this more from the orange, the green perspective, because I feel like that's where most of it is coming from. But if we look at this map, we see, wait, there's actually a lot behind that. There's actually a lot we can grow into and change in these systems. And this is also what I wanted to do now. And let me stop that for a minute. And I wanted to make a short breakout session to actually think about some of the ideas that we could do to change this and to wake all of you up. And I would invite all of you to calm down for a minute and maybe close your eyes and just become present. I mean, you don't have to, of course. And maybe think of a place that gives you the feeling of connectedness, of diversity. Maybe you have a place of raw nature, a place where you love to spend time in, something that gives you this feeling of connecting to nature. If you've done the course with Roger Walsh, maybe you can also do that, right? It's something to lift the spirit, something to get into a higher state of mind than all the depressing stuff that I've just mentioned. And let's just stay there for let's say a minute, and then we jump into the breakout rooms. I would like to hand the word to you now and actually share some of the idea that you've gathered up and to see how we can bring this more to a loop. So I don't think we will be able to talk about the left side. And I think I've spoken enough already. So who wants to go first and share what you've gathered?
I'm happy to go.
Yes, Arcos, yes?
Yeah, again, for us, I was in a pair with Deborah, and yeah, we just realized how depressed we felt after the presentation, and how contracted, and how, you know, that is there anything even we can do to influence this situation when you look at the huge power of those that concentrated power, which plays out not for the best of the world. And I guess we got a lot more hopeful by the end of our conversation, but that's certainly where we felt initially. And one of the final conclusion was, and it came from Deborah, is that, yeah, we probably need to have an integral approach to this by forgiving reality initially, because if we start from a very contracted place, then the fight or flight kind of instincts kick in. You know, are we gonna try to fight it or just exclude ourselves from the system, you know, grow our own food and then say we don't care what happens to the rest of the world, we're going to do the little thing that we do, none of which are integral sort of approaches. So somehow holding sort of the paradox and also reminding ourselves of some of the beauty that is still out there, you know, some of the good and heartful agricultural practices that are being pioneered, and hold both of them. And somehow also believe that, you know, if even on a small scale we do our thing, whether that's buying from the local farmers market, as you put it, or you know, just eating more mindfully, or I don't know, not buying shares in certain companies or buying them to have a voice, you know, those little things, if we do them with that sort of mentality, holding the paradox, then we believe that, you know, it will resonate with the universe. Because if the universe, you know, at its core has that beauty, has the truth, has the goodness, then if we do a small good thing, that could have a really big ripple effect. And I think we talked about Deborah about a great experiment that's happening down in Devon in the UK, the Schumacher Farm and College, you know, which is trying to educate people, small people like myself, you know, that they can buy a hobby sort of garden or small piece of land, and how to make that land sacred and have practices there which, you know, represent a different approach to agriculture, even on a tiny level. And that is already a great contribution to the shift in mindset that we are looking for.
Yes, Arcos, thank you. Beautiful. I think you mentioned a few very important topics here. So on the one hand, we have the awareness of the individual to actually become aware of these systems and integrate them and start helping others. Then you also mentioned growing food by ourselves, even if it's in a small scale. And you've also mentioned some of the regenerative farming practices that are, well, most of them are pretty old, but some of them are pretty new. And I've also seen some examples of how this can also already be scaled up, because I know that Danone, for example, has begun to use regenerative agriculture because it's becoming cheaper after 2 to 3 years when compared to the current system that we have that just keeps getting more expensive, and more dependent. So I think there's also a shift happening. And of course, if Danone is having like 1,000 times the amount of regenerative land that any of us could have as an individual, that's also have a big impact. So thank you a lot. That's a lot of ideas. Who's next? Chimay, I can see any
Tibor
hands.
has raised his hand.
Yes. Okay. Yes, Tibor.
Thank you for the presentation, and also we approached this topic with we talked about that it is important to connect nature more, to just see that we are part of nature and feel that we are belonging, and if we talked about awareness, so awareness of our real needs, our consumption, and our impact, also to the environment, to the economy and such, because we are the consumers, and if we consume more consciously, it could have an impact. And also, I think that the biggest idea was that that in the world there are the different countries are on different stage, and the way of thinking is on different stage. So we should help them to grow up in that way, like a, a good integral parent, and try to help them to become their full potential with minimizing the impact of the problems. Because of course, if there is a developing country who are not really, that there are no available water, let's say, they will don't care about the plastic bottle, let's say. But if we can or if a hungry child just got food because it became available, you can tell them that don't eat too much. It will be not working. But if we can support this growing up based on our experience or our integral approach by government, by such kind of things, we can minimize the impact of the different stages and more fastly get to that holistic and world view, which can lead to less or more sustainability.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. It's also a lot of the emphasis of the growth from the individual, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, I think so. That's also my personal approach, but yeah. I think Annika, you were next. You still have to unmute yourself. Oh, yes.
Yes. Hi, everybody. This is interesting. I was also like, oh, what about the left side, kind of, and it was very heavy. Of course, you know, all this information that you gave us, and I remember I'm 52 years old now, and I remember when I was younger, like 18 or younger, I heard, you know, it was taking in the environmental situation at the time, and this was a long time ago, and I just didn't feel at the time I didn't have the capacity to respond. And why I'm saying this is that now you brought this you know, heavy information in another field, nutrition, and but I felt the capacity. I feel the capacity to respond, which is like very empowering, and that's, I just wanted to bring that in because, and we didn't get into what we spoke about in terms of how to respond and what to do, was just that feeling of being empowered, that believing even that our actions, our small actions, will actually make a difference. And that's something that's, to me, that's very big, because I had, you know, you can also not believe that and easily be discouraged. So to me, that's a big thing from the left side, basically, that I wanted to bring in, that it's always there, what, you know, of course, whether we speak about it or not. So, and it's really important for us to find for a power to act, basically. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful. I can see that you felt that a lot. So thank you a lot for sharing. Yeah, I think we're also seeing some things in chat. Of course, I have to be a little mindful of the time. And Joachim also had his hand up.
Yes. So many different thoughts going on inside of me. So first, from the individual perspective, both as a producer and a consumer, I can do stuff. I could farm my own vegetables, and I don't believe that will be the solution. I think we will need big companies that produce food for a lot of people. So And in order to do that, I think we need mostly a vegetable-based for our nutrition, for our health. And when I heard your figures about how the money goes from the politicians to the agriculture and to the vegetables, it was not so much. So yeah, we need to put in systems that can make politicians make sustainable choices for our future. And when it comes to me as an individual, I think to have some kind of connection, to see a seed growing up to a plant and to produce something, even if that is not my main intake of food. I think that can have an evolutionary potential, both for me as an individual and for ourselves as a culture, to see the connection, to make more choices that are sustainable, and also to see that I vote with my money. So what I buy, if I buy organic, local produced things. And then I also have this thought about what's sustainable for me as an individual, healthy, what food intake, and for the planet. And it might, when we are so many people, it might be a contradiction between what's healthy for me as an individual and what can we grow on a big scale. So yeah, some thoughts.
Yes, thank you a lot for sharing. Yeah, I think you also mentioned an important point. I think the voting with our dollars, that's something I'm constantly trying to remind myself of. And we also have some mentions in chat here about permaculture. I'm a big fan of biologic dynamic farming, which would be called Demeter as well. These are all kinds of different regenerative farming systems. And I think the more we can support these systems, the more viable they become, the more financially suitable they become, and the cheaper these products actually become, instead of being more expensive right now than the alternative that is only being more expensive because it's getting subsidized, which is also kind of a scary thought. Chimay, do you think we can make 5 minutes longer so we can have also Alejo? And maybe with just one thought about the left quadrant, because I also got a message from Christina, because that would be nice to balance this a little bit out and not just go from things we can see and that are very hard and can be very depressing. So Alejo, maybe you can share your thoughts as well. No, you're still muted?
Yes, I am already unmuted. Thank you to all. What I wanted to say is that further than connected, we are.
Alejo, your volume is very low. If you could speak closer to the mic.
Farther than connected, we are rather the same one, and only awareness that is aware, immutable, imperturbable, and present out of mind-created time and space. And that's the matter of the living, the stepping forward in comprehension. Your presentation points to that thing. Thanks for comprehensively opening the perspective to nourishing. But the thing is that Monsanto and McDonald's are not bad. They are not bad. What is bad? They are on a collective illness. We are talking about a collective illness. But body is at the end what does not serve to comprehension, what is not adequate to comprehension, but it is adequate to comprehension. Aren't they serving us to comprehend? At the end, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be growing in comprehension. It's not that they are bad, it's that they are serving the wrong God, the golden calf. It is not that they are bad, it's just ignorance. They are doing their best for the happiness, as we are doing. Every act, every single act is for our happiness. We just put our happiness in different places. Comprehension and incomprehension follow the same path because they are in reality the same thing.
Yes.
Thousands of civilizations and species have perished before ours.
Alejo, I think I need to stop you here because we're running out of time. But thanks for sharing that. And maybe I can spend a little time, because I think that's a good transition also for the left side as well. It's about increasing the awareness of the individual and becoming increasingly conscious of their own
I just wanted to add something. The important thing that is not a drama at all. It's not any drama. If it wasn't for illness, we would still be protozoa. Life is a movement to comprehension, to transcending. Our generation, as all of us, has the most beautiful purpose to grow in comprehension for the new that will follow us, grows from healthy seeds.
Yes. All right, thank you. I also want to mention there are a lot of good recommendations in the chat. I can also recommend Little Big Farm. That's a beautiful little documentary about regenerative farming practice. I can also recommend, I think, Vandana Shiva. She was also mentioned here before. She has some amazing work. I could also recommend Dr. Mark Hyman's latest book. I think it's called Food Fix, which goes into a lot of different solutions on a global and political scale. And Michael Pollan's book, The Botany of Desire, is pretty amazing if you want to look more into the cultural impact of different foods. Maybe I can also write it in the chat later on. But maybe just the last 1 or 2 minutes, I would also like to take a look at the left side, which of course, as we know, is just as important as the right side. And it's in a way also being formed by these companies. And I don't want to spend too much time, but of course, another quote by Vandana Shiva: "We are lured into the illusion that we will have no food without the Monsanto, no water without the Cokes and Pepsis, no health without Big Pharma, and no friends without Facebook." And again, of course, this is the linear thinking, right? This is the linear causality that is trying to force a narrative that actually makes us trying to defend the system that you currently have. But I don't think anyone here is going to agree with this. Of course, this is an illusion, right? And with increasing awareness, we can shine light on it and actually dissolve that illusion. Be like, well, no, we don't need Coke and Pepsi to survive. We don't need Monsanto to feed the world. And of course, in the later traditions, this also goes into traditions. And this is also where we could spend a lot of time in, especially because we have so many traditions in here, so many different worldviews, so many amazing foods and different traditions. And of course, the question of what is moral, what is ethic, what is it actually good or bad to eat certain foods or not? And of course, we also mentioned this before earlier, the individual growth is interconnected to all of this, right? The more I begin to develop my own sense of self, the more I can realize systems and interdependence, the more I can become aware of not only the physiological effects of food on my body, but also the psychological effects that food can have on my body, on my well-being, and on my interdependence between these systems. Then we're already probably wouldn't have a lot of the issues that we have in today's world if we all saw that far. And I think you already also mentioned some of these things. So I think I have to make a cut here. I might want to add, if any of you want to have this graph, I can probably make a way to send that to you so you can look at that a little more in depth, because it's kind of unfortunate that we didn't have time to talk a lot about the left perspective, because that's also where it gets really interesting when sharing with others as well, of course. Mm. So I think,
thank you so much, Tim.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I think Shivaya will take from here.
Thank you so much, Tim, for this highly enlightening presentation.